A full expansion of this short presentation will be found in my book, Stone Circles Explained, which is available through Amazon, or you can read the book free of charge on Kindle Unlimited. Contrary to popular belief, and with the notable exception of Stonehenge, prehistoric stone circles were not constructed primarily for astronomical or religious purposes, nor were burials and cremations their main functions in the majority of cases. More than 1,000 stone circles were built in prehistoric times in the British Isles. They served practical purposes and were mostly concerned with the management of livestock and with the provision of accommodation for extended families and tribes. The diameter of these stone circles ranged from 10 metres up to 330 metres, and the number of standing stones deployed ranged from 4 up to 98. However, because the larger circles generally featured the greatest number of orthostats, the distance between orthostats was relatively constant. In no case was the gap between stones more than about 11 metres. This suggests that for the management of livestock, the orthostats may have served as straining or corner posts for timber fencing. It would have been possible to fill the gaps between orthostats using tree trunks piled up against the inside of the orthostats in such a way as to form a solid wall. The timbers may have been interlocked so that fewer trees were needed. In some cases, a palisade was formed around stockyards. Of course, all these timbers rotted away long ago. A number of prehistoric farms at Beag Moor in Ireland show clearly how stock enclosures were set out and how straight fences or hedges were constructed in order to drive animals into these enclosures. The same technique is still used by Scottish and other hill farmers when gathering sheep. Many Cornish and other stone circles were also created as livestock yards. A pattern of 4 straight fences extending at right angles from the enclosure was developed on Lewis at Callanish, but in this case the enclosure took the form of a long rectangle. This would have enabled sheep to be cornered and driven into the enclosure from any direction. The rectangular pen facilitated catching of the sheep, so that their fleeces could be plucked for weaving, after which they would have been released if not required for meat. The central stone circle was probably roofed and would have served for milking, slaughtering, shearing and weaving. There are several stone circles nearby which are the remains of farmers' houses. Turning to the question of how our prehistoric ancestors were housed, some of the simplest stone circles provided anchor points for the tents of nomadic people who followed their herds on a seasonal basis. Their tents were constructed around a central pole, from which rawhide ropes extended to the anchor stones. A lattice of ropes was woven over this framework by a procedure which has come down to us as the maypole dance, and the lattice was then covered with branches, hides or turfs. Such a communal tent could easily be assembled by a small group in a day. When nomads later settled down as farmers, their tents became more sophisticated. To increase head height around the perimeter of the tent, a ring of timber lintels was fixed on top of the orthostats, and the guy ropes were attached to these lintels. It is unthinkable that Stonehenge was the only circle to feature lintels. Arborough in Derbyshire is a good example of this type of tribal dwelling. The central pole was supported and protected by a cove of stones which have caused archaeologists much puzzlement. At some sites, the farmer's dwelling was built inside his stockyard. At Claver, near Inverness, the farmer's house consisted of a cave, constructed using stones and boulders which had been cleared from adjacent cultivated land. It had a snug central chamber, some 4 metres in diameter, accessed through a tunnel which was low enough to prevent cattle from wandering into the living room. The stockyard featured a strong palisade with gates slung between the tallest orthostats. In Aberdeenshire's recumbent stone circles, the timber lintels connecting the orthostats supported a framework of inclined poles which may have extended to completely cover the central space and were probably surfaced with hides and turf. Hides or woven materials hung along the lintels created inner tents, similar to the pologs which lined the internal circumference of the communal Yaranga dwellings of Siberian Koryak tribes. Some major circles, such as Avebury in Wiltshire, were cooperative festival sites, where several clans foregathered to slaughter livestock, to feast together, to conduct funerals, to arrange marriages, and to engage in barter. At Avebury there were 4 entrances to the great enclosure, and stone avenues extending from the circle facilitated the driving of animals into the circle from all directions. Raised banks surrounded the enclosure from which the tribes could watch bullfighting ceremonies, as is done to this day in Spain and in Toraja, Indonesia, where funerals are still a central purpose of these gatherings. At Avebury, corpses were moved after the festival for storage in long barrows which are not far away. Stonehenge was a more complex site, which consisted originally of a circle of inward-facing, lean-to, semi-communal dwellings, similar to Easter Acrothes in Aberdeenshire, but much larger and open in the centre. Later, a stone calendar was constructed within the central space, which facilitated monitoring of the cycles of sun and moon and signalled the dates for seasonal festivals. The solar year was divided into 4 quarters, which were highlighted at Stonehenge when the rising sun cast a shaft of sunlight over a male outlying orthostat and penetrated one of the 4 lesser trilithons, which represented the earth goddess in her seasonal forms: child, maiden, mother, crone. When a shaft of light passed over the heelstone and through the great trilithon at midwinter, this symbolized rebirth of the sun god himself, renewal of the earth mother, and the start of a new year. The 30 days of each lunar cycle were represented by the 30 sarsens which formed the great circle. Many prehistoric cultures worked to a 360-day calendar consisting of 12 30-day moon months. In order to reconcile this 360-day term with 365-day solar reality, 5 extra calendrical days were added each year, sometimes as in Rome in one lump at midwinter, or alternatively with a festival at each quarter day, and 1 or 2 in a leap year at midwinter. The 5 trilithons marked these 5 extra calendrical days. The oldest dated stone circles in the world are at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. They are more than 10,000 years old, and their main purpose was the recycling of corpses, which were first exposed on platforms above the centre of circular pits for vultures to pick at. Corpses later fell down into the pit, and carnivores were released into the pit to complete consumption of the corpse. The pillars which surrounded each pit supported a catwalk of timber planking and were carved with pictures of meat-eating creatures such as vultures, lions, foxes, hyenas, snakes, and scorpions. In addition to natural funerals, the pits were probably also used for the execution of prisoners. The book of Daniel tells how the prophet was lowered into such a pit after he had broken a law. However, the king evidently did not want Daniel killed, so he did not release his lions into the pit from their adjacent passageway. Disposal of corpses in this way continued into modern times in the Zoroastrian and Parsi traditions, which featured circular dakmas where corpses were exposed to vultures. Stone Circles Explained is available as a paperback through Amazon, or you can read it for free on Kindle Unlimited.